Welcome to the Turabian webinar for GS 801, and I appreciate that you're taking time out of your schedule to do this. So as Janine has already mentioned, I'm Sandy Oslin, so I'm the librarian for the seminary programs. I am also in the Doctor of Ministry program. I am the thesis library reader, so I will be reviewing your theses at the end of the writing process. And I'm also the Turabian tutor for the Academic Resources Center. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. So in our time together today, I'm going to cover just the basics of Turabian style for formatting footnotes and bibliography entries. And to quote from page 47 of the student manual, the Doctor of Ministry student manual, you must use the style and formatting conventions of Turabian. This is not a suggestion, but a requirement. The best practice is to use Turabian from the beginning of your writing. This eliminates the arduous task of having to go back to your paper and reformat it once you're done writing. So hopefully the time you're investing today to learn about the Turabian style will save you a lot of time in the future. So here's our agenda for today. I'm going to talk about why citations are important. We'll talk about preparation of citations, and then some of the basic elements of Turabian citations that are true for both footnotes and bibliography entries. Then we'll look more closely at Turabian footnotes and examples of that. Little time on the Turabian shortened notes, and then end up with the basics of Turabian bibliography entries, and then we'll look at some examples of those. So first of all, why is it important to cite your sources? According to Turabian, the first is to give credit. So research is hard work. And when you cite other scholars in your thesis, you're giving them the recognition that they have earned. We cite sources to reassure the readers of the accuracy of facts. Citing your sources correctly is the first step in building trust with your readers. If your readers know and can locate the source of your facts, they can judge the validity of your facts for themselves. To quote from Turabian, if the readers do not trust your sources, they will not trust your facts. And if they do not trust your facts, they will not trust your arguments. We also cite to show the reader the research tradition that informs the work. Researchers not only cite specific sources that they use, but also sources that may support, contradict, or extend their research. So citations can connect readers to other research on the topic. Oops. And finally, we cite things to help readers follow or extend your research. Many readers use citations to pursue their own research. So when I'm working with students and they're doing a research project, I always advise them that if they find an article or a book that is right on target for their project, that they should look at the bibliography or the references, because these can be a treasure trove of resources for their topic. Weinmeister also talks about citations, or in this case, reference notes. According to Weinmeister, we use reference notes or citations to indicate that there is authority behind the statements made. This strengthens the researcher's arguments. Reference notes are important to help the reader easily find the referenced material. And it also admits one's intellectual indebtedness to another author. Are there any questions up to this point? Kind of the background and the whys of citation. Okay. So what information do you need to include in a citation? So as you're collecting your resources and you're preparing your citations, you need to be able to answer these questions for each of the resources that you use in your thesis. Who created it? What data identifies the text? Who published the text and in what context? When was the text published? And where can the text be found? So there are some things you should keep in mind before you begin collecting your resources. And if you do these, it'll strengthen the quality of your bibliography, and it will save you a lot of time when you're further along in the writing process. First of all, always use the most authoritative version of a work. So if you find a source that's listed somewhere, track down the original source. If at all possible, you should be citing the original source instead of a secondary source. If the source has multiple versions or editions, only cite the edition you actually used. Remember that your readers should be able to locate the information you used based on the information in the citation. Record all of the bibliographic information for the sources you use before you consult them and you take your notes. Having worked in the library for many years, I cannot tell you how many times we received calls from people who didn't record the bibliographic information for their sources before they started their project. And then they would call the library in a panic trying to track down the bibliographic information. Sometimes we were able to find it, but sometimes we weren't. So use whatever system works for you to keep track of your sources. If you want to use RefWorks, that is one tool that can help you record and organize your sources. Be sure to record the page number for every quotation.
I'm sorry, I was going to just Sandy, have you mentioned to them RefWorks is something provided for them by Bethel? Just maybe mention that so that if they want to use it.
Yes, and I hadn't mentioned that, but it's offered by Bethel, and you actually get to keep access to it after you graduate. So once you have set up your account, you have access to it. There are other tools out there, but I'm most familiar with RefWorks, and it's free to you. So that's the one that we kind of direct people to unless they have something else that they want to use. So going back to the preparation of citations, record the page number for every quotation and paraphrase. It's a lot easier to do this work when you're early in the writing process rather than trying to track down that information when you're almost done with your thesis. And as you're writing, mark every location in the text where you may need to cite a source. So are there any questions up to now? So now we're going to start getting into some of the nuts and bolts. Okay. So what I'm going to talk about now are some basic elements or basic rules that will be true whether you're doing footnotes or bibliography entries. So the elements in footnotes and bibliography entries are always going to include the same basic elements in the same order, regardless of what type of resource you're using. You will always include the author, title, and the facts of publication. So book titles and journal titles are always going to be italicized. Journal article titles, book chapter titles, dissertation titles, and webpage titles are going to be placed in quotation marks, but not italicized. Most titles are going to be capitalized using headline style. That means that you capitalize the first and last and all important words in the title. Do not capitalize prepositions, articles, or conjunctions within the title. And the word page or the abbreviations P or PP are not included before page numbers. And you'll see that as we get into the examples. Footnotes use a regular paragraph indent. Oh, so sorry. Pause for a moment here. So now we're switching into the footnote specific formatting. So there are some things that are very similar to the bibliography entry, but a few differences to be aware of. So first of all, the regular indent for footnotes. So the first line of the footnote is going to be indented 5 inches from the left margin. Any subsequent lines will be even with the left margin. So the footnotes must be in the 10-point size of the same font that you use for the body text. So I think for Doctor of Ministry thesis, you're using Times New Roman. So you would be using 10-point for the footnotes, 12-point for the text. Footnotes are single spaced. And if you have more than one footnote on a page, be sure to put a blank line between the notes. This tends to throw people off a little bit, but in footnotes, the author's names are presented in standard order, first name, last name. So if I've written something, the footnote for my work would just say Sandy Osland. This is a piece right here. If you can remember this and make this distinction between footnotes and bibliography entries, it will save you a lot of time and trouble down the road. But most of the elements of a footnote are separated by commas instead of periods. You'll see that in the examples as we go through that. Footnotes include specific locators such as page numbers. Remember that your readers should be able to track down the source of the information that you reference in your thesis. So it's important to include the locators in the footnotes. And for your Doctor of Ministry thesis, footnotes will be numbered consecutively throughout the thesis. So you will not be restarting the numbering from chapter to chapter. So the very first time that you cite a source, you do need to put in the complete information. So all of the author title, publication information, and the page numbers. And then if you cite that source again, you may use the shortened note form instead. And you'll see examples of that in just a little bit, but you can use it, either use the author and page numbers or author title and page numbers. Turabian mentions the use of IBID, but the Doctor of Ministry manual advises instead that you should use the author page number shortened note instead of IBID if you have consecutive citations for the same source. So now we're going to get into some examples. In the examples here, the little hashtags or hash marks represent the footnote number, and the X's represent page numbers. So here you'll see we've got author's first and last name, comma, the book title italicized, and then for all of the, for books in Turabian, the publication information is put in parentheses. So there's no punctuation after the book title, but in parentheses, you would put place of publication, colon, the publisher, comma, date, and then close the parentheses. Then, like I said before, you don't use page or any page indicator. There's just a comma and then the page number that you're citing. So in an actual example, you would see Peter T. Vogt, comma, interpreting the Pentateuch in Exegetical Handbook, and then in parentheses, the publication information, Grand Rapids, Michigan. And when you are including state information, which you should if there's more than one city that has the same name, use the 2-letter postal code abbreviations. And there is a list of those in Turabian if you have questions about that. But Grand Rapids, Michigan, Kriegel Publications, 2009, and then a comma and the page numbers. If you have multiple authors, then you would just put the names in regular order. So Justin A. Irving and Mark L. Strauss, the book title information. And then again, in parentheses, the publication location, publisher's name, comma, date, comma, and then the date, the page numbers. Okay. You might be using commentaries, especially when you're doing your chapter 2, the theological reflection. And I'm going to put in a little side advertisement here for the library. When you're doing your chapter 2, the library has a lot of commentaries that are available online. So please do not be using freebies you find on the internet when we have a lot of really good scholarly commentaries available to you. But people sometimes have difficulty because the series can be it adds a little more information that can be confusing. So what you'll do, again, author's first name, last name, comma, italicize the book title and subtitle, comma, and then just in regular font, you'll put the series title and then publication information and the page numbers. So what this looks like for this book is we have Dennis R. Edwards, comma, and then the title, 1 Peter, comma, The series title is Story of God Bible Commentary. So that's just regular font. And then we have the publication information, comma, page number. Book chapters can also be a little more complicated because you have to identify not only the actual chapter title, but also the work in which it appears. This happens a lot in theological writing and biblical studies because there might be a book that is a collection of essays written by different authors. So you need to identify the author of the chapter and as well as the publication in which it appears. So you have the author's first and last name, comma, and then the chapter title in quotation marks. And then I've highlighted this, you actually put the word in, and then followed by the book title, subtitle, and publication information and page. So in an example here, we have Janine Brown, comma, the chapter title in quotation marks, and then that word in. And then the book is Built Upon the Rock, Studies in the Gospel of Matthew. And I've included the editor information here, so that would be comma, and then edited Dan Gertner and John Noland, publication information, and the page number. So any questions up to this point? Okay. So an ebook is going to be very much like a regular book. You'll have the author's first and last name, the book title, publication information. The difference is after the page number, you place a comma and then you either put the URL or you can put the name of the database. So for example, the library has a lot of books that are available through ProQuest eBook Central. So if this is where you found the book, you would list that in place of the URL at the end of the citation. Now, in most cases, the books that we have through the library, through ProQuest eBook Central, are PDF versions. So the page numbers are going to match what you see from print book to the ebook. I'm going to give a little caveat on Kindle in just a second. So if you were citing this ebook, it would be Allison Lowe, comma, the book title in italics, the publication information, comma, page number, and then ProQuest eBook Central. Now this, if you're using a Kindle or some other kind of ebook reader, many of the readers, such as Kindle, do not have fixed page numbers. So please do not cite device-specific locations because they could vary from one device to another. So what might be a location 615 on your device would not be the same for someone else. Instead, you could cite by the chapter or section number instead of the page number, but try to be as precise as you possibly can. And then if there are no chapter or sections numbers, you can use the name of the chapter or section instead. Okay. So now we're going to switch into some different, we've been looking at books up to now. We're going to look at a few different kinds of resources and how to footnote those. Okay, so next we're going to look at a journal article. Now the one main difference here between a journal article and a book is the colon that goes before the page numbers. And I've highlighted that here. So rather than a comma, it's a colon. So again, author's first and last names, comma, the article title in quotation marks, then the journal title will be italicized, the volume number, issue number, the date will go in parentheses, followed by the colon and the page number. So here we would have John Anthony Dunn, comma, the article title in quotation marks, and then italicized Scottish Journal of Theology, volume 68, number 1, 2015, and then that colon, and then the page number. For your research, you might also be looking at a lot of dissertations or theses. So this is what a dissertation footnote would look like, the author's first and last name, and then in quotation marks, the dissertation title. And then in place of the publication information, you'll list the kind of paper. So like if it's a PhD or Doctor of Ministry, and then the academic institution, the date, comma, and the page numbers. So here we have Elizabeth Peterson, comma, the title of her thesis, and then in the parentheses, it's a Demon thesis, comma, Bethel Seminary, comma, the date, and then the page numbers. Websites can be a little bit tricky, and sometimes you won't find all of this information, but you should try to get, again, as specific as you can. So if there is an author's name, you include that first, and then in quotation marks, you would have the page title, and then you have the site title or description, the owner or sponsor, a publication or revision date. And if you can't find that on the page, then use the accessed date instead. And finally, the URL. So here's one from the Census Bureau, in quotation marks, populations and peoples, comma, and then the United States Census Bureau, comma, and then the date it was accessed, and then finally the URL. So we have come to the end of the footnotes portion. Are there any questions so far?
Sandy, this is Ken Nabby. Is there any information that is not in the footnote that would be in the bibliography? Or is everything that's in the footnote also in the bibliography, just different order?
Basically different order. The one difference, and I'll mention it in a little bit, but when you have a journal article or a book chapter in the bibliography, you will cite the full range of pages. So that's one, so like in a footnote, you're only going to cite the specific page you're using. So that's the one piece of information that would be, you have to be inclusive in the bibliography. But otherwise, the other information is going to be the same, just arranged a little differently or with a little different punctuation.
This is maybe a,
oh, go ahead. Go right ahead, Ken.
I'm sorry. This is maybe just a why question. You know, the Turabian manual specifies that IBID is acceptable, but Bethel has decided that they really don't want to do that, just only the shortened notes. Is there a reason why? Just curious.
There probably is, but I don't know why that is.
Well, I would say that that's a publishing preference more widely. I noticed that in some of my book publishing, and it might be because IBID, if you move past, you know, if there's a page break when they're formatting my book and IBID's on the next page, or if they end up doing end notes, or, you know, but mostly because of page number, then you are making a person turn back to see. So part of it is kind of where changes fall, page changes fall. But I've noticed that different publishers prefer to avoid IBID as well. Some of them, not all. So I think it's more going with sort of that tendency, I would say maybe.
I mean, and that makes sense to me because you want it to be as simple
Clear.
as possible for people to find, you know, the source. And
well,
so,
and then if you're inserting something between us, name and what was the name and then IBID, it can actually cause confusion and or error. Because if you've inserted it and not paid attention to that, you had an IBID following for Smith, IBID, and now you have Clark in between, you've just made that IBID Clark. And so it's just cleaner when you're in your own work to not do it, and then to not have to change it back at the end is kind of helpful. So.
mm-hmm. Any other questions? I
was just going to mention in terms of a quick important thing, because I've had to do a lot of going back and finding things. So when you have a journal article, and you have that full pagination 85 through 97, but you're just using page 95, don't just put 95 in your notes or type. I do something like 87 through 95, and I use this Catholic Biblical Quarterly has you do this here, page 95. And then I can go back and clean it up later, but to have it all in one place is really helpful, because when I'm building my bibliography, I don't have to find in my written notes, or, I mean, if I was using RefWorks, well, I probably could just run back there, but it's easier for me to have stuck it with the footnote at first. I just had to remember to clean it up when I'm done. So keep the full, or you can put it right afterwards. I'm going to use 95 as the page, but then afterwards I put a parenthetical 82 through 99 so that I have that information in my document. That saved me lots of time.
Mhm.
So just
It sounds like a good practice.
now. Okay.
Okay. So we're going to go now into the shortened notes. So we've talked a little bit about those already, but they should include enough information so that the readers can find the full citation either in the bibliography or in the previous footnote. And the shortened note can consist of the author's last name and a page number separated by a comma and then just ending with a period. But if you're citing more than one work by the same author, you should add a shortened title of up to 4 words from the title so that you can make the distinction between different works by that author. But you would use quotation marks for article titles or italics for book titles, the same as you would in a full footnote. So here we have a couple of examples. This is the shortened note with just the author and page number version. So we have the Peter Vogt work. So you have the full citation. Then we have Dunn's article with the full citation. And then footnote number 3 is just Dunn, comma, page 10. And then 4 is just Vogt, comma, 62. So if you're using just the author page number, this is all you need to do for the shortened note. If you're using the author title page number, then you'd have the full citations for footnote 1 and 2, and then footnote 3, it would be Dunn, comma, and then some of the article title words enough so that it's identifiable in quotation marks because it's a journal article, and then the page number. And then number 4 is Vogt, the book title, some of the words from the book title, italicized, and then comma and page number. So next we're going to move into the bibliography entries. And like I mentioned, a lot of it is similar to footnotes, but there'll be a few things that are distinguished from them. So first of all, this one people are probably familiar with. Every bibliography entry is a paragraph with a hanging indent. So you're always going to have that first line, even with the left margin, and then any subsequent lines are going to be indented half an inch. So the entries are single spaced and there should be a blank line between each entry. And this is where the author's names are presented in inverted order. So last name, comma, first name. However, if the work has more than one author, any of the additional authors' names are just listed in standard order. If you have more than one work by the same author, you put the name in that first bibliographic entry, but any subsequent entries, you can replace the author's name with an underscore. And there is an example of that, I think in Turabian, but also in the Doctor of Ministry student handbook. All materials that you've cited must be included in the bibliography. However, the bibliography could also include some sources that were consulted, but that you didn't actually cite in the work. And now here's the distinction between the footnotes and the bibliography. Most elements of a bibliography entry will be separated by periods rather than commas. And we've talked about this already. In general, you don't include page numbers in the bibliography, but if you're citing a journal article or a book chapter, you do need to include the full span of pages for the section or for the article. And your thesis bibliography will be in alphabetical order with no subdivisions. So you won't break it down by chapter or anything. It'll be one alphabetical bibliography. So now we'll take a look at what does a bibliography look like for different materials that we've already discussed. So for a regular book, we have the author's last name, comma, first name, followed by a period, the book title in italics, followed by a period, then the place of publication, colon, publisher and date. So here we have Vogt, comma, Peter T. the book title in italics, followed by a period, and then the publication information, Grand Rapids, Michigan, Kriegel Publications, comma, and then the date. If there are multiple authors, you only invert the first author's name. So it's author's last name, comma, first name. And then you continue using commas for the number of authors that you have. So in this case, we'll just have 2 authors. So it's the author's first author's name, comma, then the word and, the second author's first and last names, and then period, book title in italics, period, the place of publication, publisher and date. And something that I'll just mention here. So if you have 4 or more authors, in the footnote, you can put just the first author's name and then the et al. But in a bibliography, you do list all of the authors' names. So that came up the other night and I forgot to mention that earlier. So anyway, in the example here, we'd have Irving, comma, Justin A, and then you include the comma and then the word and then the second author's name, title, period, publication information. The book chapter, this gets really fun. So we've got the author's last name, comma, first name, the chapter title with a period at the end there. And then for the bibliography, the word in is capitalized. So you have capital in the book title, and then comma, and then this is where you have the full span of pages for the book chapter, for the chapter. Publication information, and so on. So here we have Brown, Janine, period, and then the chapter title in quotation marks with a period at the end, and then the word in, capitalized. And then here's the book title, and then I threw in the editor information. So it's edited by Jan Gertner and John Noland, comma, and then here's the span of pages for the entire chapter. And then publisher, publication, location, publisher, and the date. The commentary series, author's last name, comma, first name, period, the book title, period, and then the series title in regular font, followed by a period, and then the publication information. So here we have Edwards, comma, Dennis R, excuse me, First Peter, period, and then, excuse me, Story of God, Bible commentary, and then Grand Rapids. So the journal article, again, author's last name, first name, period. The article title in quotation marks with a period. And then the rest of this is like the footnote, except that the page numbers will be the full span of the article, not just the specific page. So we have done, comma, John Anthony. The article title in quotation marks with a period at the end. Scottish Journal of Theology, italicized, the volume number, issue number, the date, again, colon, just like we did in the footnote, and then the total number of pages. So here we have a sample bibliography. I didn't include any that have like the underscore for second works by the same author, but this is what the bibliography would look like for some of the works that we've already cited. And if you don't remember everything that we talked about today, there is tutoring available through the Academic Resource Center. And appointments are set up as email sessions. So if you sign up for an appointment, you don't have to be present at the time of your appointment. Generally, you just email whatever, like the chapter you're working on, for example, and then it'll be reviewed and sent back to you. But Zoom appointments are available upon request. For Doctor of Ministry students, you can schedule up to 2 hours of appointments per week. For other programs at Bethel, they use APA style. So a lot of times the students will schedule 2 back-to-back appointments. But when you're using Turabian, if you want to do a writing appointment as well as Turabian, you would schedule 2 separate appointments, because you'd schedule a Turabian appointment with me and then a regular writing appointment to have someone else, help you with the writing process. And then here's the information for how to schedule an appointment with them. Oh,
I would just mention that at the end of the term, or not at the end, toward the end of the term in Module 5, we are asking you to sign up for a session with the Academic Writing Center, just as a way to get you using that resource, and also because you'll be working with the lit review at that point. And lit reviews are kind of a special odd duck, if you want to put it that way. We're not used to doing them all that much.
Yeah.
Some of you might have done them already, but I didn't do any till my doctoral work. I didn't.
Mhm.
And then I did a big one. So that is a good time to tap the shoulder of the Writing Center about that.
Yeah.
Andy.
Yeah. And they're great. So the only thing is that they're very proficient with APA and not so much Turabian. So I'm the person here if you need some extra help with Turabian. So. And that is the end.
Yeah, so questions for Sandy. I know you can take those questions. Also double check the chat feature if people wrote down questions. Anything you want to ask her? This Sandy's, she's available now. This is great. She knows stuff.
Well, and then again, I'll put in the plug for the library research piece too. So as you're looking for resources for your thesis, feel free to contact me because I can help you with that.
So do you see the question from Ken?
Yes.
Go ahead. Can you remind us where we can
Yeah.
familiarize ourselves with RefWorks?
If you want to go, let me get out of this. Let me show you. There is a Doctor of Ministry research guide. So I'll show you that. So let me share this here. So are you seeing the library page, hopefully?
Yes, we are.
Yes, okay. So if you go down here to research guides, and then down to guides for seminary right here, there is a guide specifically for Doctor of Ministry students. And so here under bibliographic management, there's information here about RefWorks. And so here's to log in, but then here, this takes you to the guide for using RefWorks. So that's probably the easiest way.
And that's a great thing to bookmark, so you can just get right there. When you are looking for research, and I've done this actively, whether you're in ClickNet or what was ClickNet, sorry, the book
LibSearch now.
LibSearch, and then also ATLA database, which is where I do a lot of my work for biblical studies and where you'll do work for biblical research. When you find a resource and you want to then cite or save, you can save it right to RefWorks from there. So as you're doing research, you can save an item, article, journal article, book, right to RefWorks. If you're even remotely interested in it, I say just save it. It takes about an extra 10 seconds once you're signed into your RefWorks account. And then you've got it there and you can categorize things and organize them. So go ahead, Sandy.
Yeah, no, perfect. No, that's perfect. But yeah, I would say it's better to throw everything into the bucket and then sort it out later than to maybe miss something, or wish you had captured that when you were in it the first time.
Where did I find that and what was it again? I've had those moments. Other questions, things that make you nervous about any particular part? It's a good place for a question to come up.
Mine isn't so much a question as just a thought that it's hearing and seeing and practicing these things are really helpful and wonderful. And thank you so much for the time. I know myself, this isn't real until I'm in it doing it.
Yeah.
And that's when I'll have a million bajillion questions for you. So I'm just thankful for your availability and that you're already pointing us to where we can ask those questions when we get into it, and the emphasis in the program of practicing as we go so that when it's go time on our thesis, we're pretty set up for success. So thank you for that.
Yes.
And Tucker and I both, as we've talked about both sets of classes in this course, if you can get, 2 or 3 more things under your belt in terms of Turabian in this semester, and then next semester, 2 or 3 things more, that's the way I look at my own ability to do formal kinds of stuff, getting the next step and the big picture things like commas in the footnotes and periods in the, then going kind of more granular as you go. If you already got that, you're like way ahead. So
for sure.
Yeah. So just building that. So think about skill development. Think about, okay, what can I master in footnotes this semester? You're not going to master everything. Where does that little page range go in a book chapter that I'm citing?
Yeah.
I still don't know. I have to go back and look. It makes me crazy. I throw it in the wrong place often. But at least throw it in there and then work on fine tuning. If you feel like I'm not in the place to do the formal stuff, I'm writing my paper, make sure you save all the right information in the footnotes and I just use my footnote and then build my bibliography from there. Keep going with the creative juices, the writing piece, but save all the right information. And then when you're in the mood to do formatting, which you'll have to at some point, go back and do it then. So I kind of give myself permission to wait on formatting and not do all that little stuff, because my brain is working in different quadrants when I'm doing the creative writing, thoughtful analysis, and then when I need to do form stuff. And some nights I'm just like, I'm watching a football game, like I can do the formal stuff. That's when I caught I had to go back and change every single thing, every dash my commentary. And, I'm citing scripture all over the place. So it went from an N dash to a M dash. I don't know.
Yeah.
I had to
Enter M,
copy.
I don't.
Yeah. So I had to do a kind of a holistic replace all, but I had to check every single one to make sure was between numbers and not somewhere else. And so I did that during a Vikings game earlier. I don't know what it was. Anyway. Other questions? I think you've done it, Sandy. We are all set.
Okay. So just let me know, like, whenever there are questions.